Hello, everyone. Welcome to episode 2 of the Songwriters on Process podcast. My name is Ben Opapari, and this week's episode is with Allison Russell and Aoife O'Donovan. The two of them know each other, so this was a dual interview, more of a conversation between the two of them, but that's kind of what I wanted anyway when I get two people together to talk about the songwriting process. As I told both of them, my highly scientific way of doing this is to follow each of them on Twitter, see if they follow each other, and then see if they want a conversation. And turns out not only do they know each other, but on Aoife's latest album, Alice is actually featured on there on a song called Prodigal Daughter, which is beautiful. So check that out. So what struck me most about this conversation was this was pretty much two full-time working moms talking about their songwriting process. And when you're a full-time working mother, I mean, obviously their full-time job is as musicians, process doesn't really happen. Your time is not your own. We have 4 kids, and so I know that as well. And when you have kids and you're a parent and you are parenting, you don't really have a routine. You write when you can. And so this was not about, sitting down and having a nice cup of coffee and strumming the guitar during the morning. This is about finding time in the day between taking kids to practices and carpooling and homeschooling and Zoom schooling and all those kind of things. I haven't really talked to many songwriters who are parents, so this was a unique perspective for me to hear this, just how busy they are. So not surprising when you hear it, and it's even more impressive that they put out just such amazing albums this year. This is Russell's first solo album, and it's been nominated for 3 Grammys this year: the Best Americana album, then for Outside Child, and the single Night Flyer has been nominated for Grammys in the Best Americana Roots Performance and the Best Americana Roots Song. O'Donovan has a fantastic album out. I feel like I say fantastic a lot today, but it's really true, called Age of Apathy. And that's where the song Prodigal Daughter is on, that features Russell on vocals. So that version is on YouTube also, and the two of them are doing it together, I think, at Newport. So anyway, that is this week's interview. Hope you enjoy it, and thanks for listening. All right, so let's start with this. Aoife, I'll start with you. We'll go to Allison. So outside of songwriting, and maybe specifically journal writing, Aoife, how much writing outside of songwriting, if any, are you doing? I guess, and if there's any journaling involved, songwriters tend to fall into 3 categories I've noticed: those that journal, those that don't but wish they did, and those that don't and have no desire to ever start.
I'm number 3.
You are? Oh, really? Okay. So there's nothing, not even like any kind of like jotting down of things for outside of that songwriting?
I think I do jot down stuff. I think I just, I guess like I'm having a reaction to the word somebody that journals, like to use the word journal as a verb like that. Yeah, that's not my thing. But I do write down ideas like on scraps of paper or in an iPhone note, or like I have like a little notebook that I might, like if I have a phrase of an idea, I'll write it down, but I don't consider it journaling. But I'm very happy for people who do, have that as an outlet. That's just not my thing. I really, it's funny though, because if I were not a songwriter and a musician, I do feel if I could go back and live another life where I was a different version of myself, I would love to be a journalist. Which I guess is technically someone who journals.
Someone who's journaled. Now,
for a living, even.
I'm a big conundrum, I suppose.
Do you have? I've also heard that some songwriters actually do. They'll tell me this in secret. Have elaborate filing systems for those ideas. Gosh, I've heard Excel spreadsheets, Word documents. Like when you have all these ideas. Do you ever think, oh, where was that? Was it in the voice memo? Was it in the notebook? Like, is there a way to kind of store these to go back to them for when you might need them?
Are you still asking me, or is it?
Yeah.
Okay.
We'll stay with you. We'll go to Allison.
I do have a lot of ideas on voice memos that sometimes if I'm on a long flight, I'll listen back to voice memos from like the last 10 years. And sometimes I will find stuff. I wish to God I were the kind of person who had an elaborate filing system for that and anything like my spices or my clothes or but that's just not like, unfortunately, I feel like I'm always just barely staying afloat of like keeping myself and my family fed and like somewhat clean. Like it's just like, I wish again in my other life where I'm a journalist and I write for, an esteemed publication, I will have elaborate filing systems for everything in my life. But right now I'm just trying to like use my free time to play the guitar and go for a run. Like that's where I'm at.
Yeah. All right, Allison, how about you? Where do you fall in that category?
There are points of resonance and also places where we diverge. I am now someone who journals. I think I always have been. I've always been someone who just wrote copiously in little leather bound volumes, and I still do it. And it's not necessarily, this is what happened today type of, it's just free form writing mostly for me. Sometimes it does end up being processing something that I'm going through, but often it's just more abstract and free form and stream of consciousness for me. And that does then dovetail with jotting down song ideas or poem ideas. And I do write outside of songwriting now more than maybe I ever have before, because I'm working on a book. And so I've just written my first book proposal and, sort of had my first rounds of meeting with some publishers and things like that. So that has been an interesting process. And I've written the first few chapters of this book that I'm working on. And so that's a whole new world, but very much like Aoife, I really wish I had that lovely A-type personality to be able to organize everything and have things just so, but my truth is a lot more haphazard and chaotic than that. I have a lot of notes on my phone. I've just started to use the word system because that's what I had to do in order to submit my book proposal. And so that's been quite lovely for working on longer form writing. That feels a bit more organized for me, but I tend to use Google Drive and documents like a book of poetry, basically. But then I also still am very analog, where poetry usually comes through first with a pencil in my journal. Let's see, swag. Usually it's like swag from something. This is from the Pitchfork Social Salt Spring Island in BC series. They gave us these lovely books. That's what I'm writing.
That's so great.
So there's always, it's always some sort of like something we got at some show or some gig somewhere. And I use that. BMI gave me some lovely big notebooks. So I'm using one and Ida's using one for her fan fiction for Wings of Fire.
So Allison, are you when it comes to those lyrics, and Allison, are you a pen and paper? You are a pen and paper person?
Both. I think I was exclusively a pen and paper person for a long time. And then modern times forced me to adapt. And I do a lot of jotting things down in the notes of the phone. And I do a lot of humming melodies and ideas either into voice memos, or I have this little app on my phone that is, that's like a rudimentary kind of a 4-track set type of thing. So if I think of, often harmony ideas will come to me along with the main melody. So I'll hum a few things along just to kind of try not to lose it before I have time to go back. Like Aoife, we're working moms. So finding the time, the undisturbed time for me tends to be between the hours of midnight and like 4 a.m. So I'll jot things down in the day in whatever way, whether it's in a journal or in the notes or in Google Drive or in the Word app or in my little 4-track app. And then I'll work on it in the wee hours when it's quiet. And I feel like I can get closer to, the slipstream than I can during the day when it's dogs and kid and all of that.
Yeah. Okay. So I want to go back. We'll talk about the ritual in a couple of minutes, like the specifics of it. But Aoife, let me go back to you. Rather than make this like the standard COVID question, about how much did you get done? I think I'd like to phrase it as how how much do you get done with large expanses of time? I find that this idea, I think when COVID first happened, that people thought, oh, all of you songwriters will get so much done because you're not touring and this is great and you have all this free time. And in fact, a lot of people, I'm the same way. Like I make false deadlines for myself as a writer. Like if I say to myself, I've got to have this done by X, I'll get it done. But if you say to me, I've got 30 days, I won't. So Aoife, I guess my question for you is when it comes, do you write better under deadline or with large expanses of time?
I think it's not really an either or question for me. I think in the past, I've always had more of a deadline because, it's between touring cycles, you schedule your recording dates and then you have to have your songs done by the time you're going to make your record, and you need that record done because the tour is already booked for your album release and it's slotted in with your label's timeline to get the album out. So there are just so many deadlines that exist because of how our industry is set up. But that being said, this year, or I guess 2 years ago,
yeah.
when March 2020 came around, I just put out a record and had done one show and was about to tour it. And then that kind of went away. And I did feel a little bit like, oh God, all people wanted from a lot of musicians in those first few months, those first 4 or 5 months even, was content, was like videos, was sort of, songs and little performances. And it just ended up being all the time that you had to do work was sort of rehashing stuff. It was doing like a 3-song thing for this, a 4-song Zoom happy hour of this. It wasn't as much like you didn't actually have the time you were still doing shows. You know what I mean? It was just, you weren't on the road doing it. When I came down here to Florida in September of 2020, that's when I really did sort of start to say, oh, wow, I do have all this time and I had access to a studio. So I did end up writing more than and releasing more music than I ever have before in my career. So I guess you could say that that means I did better with all this time, but it's hard to say. I think it just sort of made the most of the situation.
Do you think though, I mean, I told you earlier, right, we have 4 kids and I found that having kids makes me much more disciplined as a writer because I know I have like if I've got 2-3 hours in the day, I'm not going to say, I'll lounge around for an hour. It's like, oh, now I can get all this stuff done. Right. So do you find that having less time has made you more efficient because you have to be more productive in that small space?
I think I'm just not really a lounge around kind of person. Like I think in general, I'm a pretty efficient person, and my husband is efficient to a fault. It's like we both try to get a lot of stuff done in a day, and there's no wasted hour. Like sometimes I will, go with them for the school drop off so I can get out of the car and run home before, like get my run in that way. So then I can take my shower and I'll like be humming songs in the shower and then get out and do something else, like do all my phone calls on the way to somewhere. Like, you just really have to make the most of every minute. But I think I've always been like that. Having a kid has just meant that there are, fewer opportunities to do all the things that you want to do, but there are also more opportunities to do things that are better. It's just sort of like a shift.
Yeah. Allison, how about you? Would you call yourself like a disciplined writer?
I am disciplined, I think, in the sense that I try to write every day, no matter what. I don't know. I guess that is the practice for me, is what I would say. I'm not sure how discipline works for me creatively anymore, other than I think it's really important to play my instrument even a little bit every day, or an instrument a little bit every day. It's important. I sing all the time. I mean, that's not so much a discipline as like a self-soothing or something. I might as well be sucking my thumb, honestly, because it's like comforting to me to sing. And it always has been. And I did that before I thought anyone would want to hear me do it. And I still do it. And I sing a lot with my daughter, actually. That's one of the ways we bond.
I've had this conversation with a lot of songwriters about the role of movement. I have been a runner for many years and ran track in college and have been running for a long time. And about 5 years ago, I'll send it to both of you. I wrote an article in the Washington Post about the role that exercise plays in higher order thinking. So they put people, and it's been in the lab, so it's been measured, put people on a treadmill for 30 minutes at moderate 60% max heart rate, which is like a moderate walk. And then after the treadmill, administer a battery of tests to those people. And those people always score higher than people who weren't on the treadmill because of the chemical called brain-derived neurotrophic factor that's released in the brain during increased blood flow with exercise. So there's clear evidence that exercise has an immediate, and it's for about 90 minutes post-exercise. About 90 minutes, you're at your creative peak. And the good thing is it's not dose responsive. So an hour isn't twice as good as 30 minutes, and 90% max heart rate isn't any better than 60%. I mean, speaking of kids, this has enormous implications for why kids should be doing recess every day.
Of course.
But for adults, right? And I know, and I've read interviews where you talk about running, but I'd like to talk, I guess, more broadly about the role of movement, because the crazy things I've heard, I interviewed Yola a couple weeks ago, and she talked about how vacuuming, literally the vacuuming, and she said she's gotten so there's a couple of things. It's not just the sound of the vacuum, but it's the repetitive motion. It's when you're doing something that doesn't require brain power, your creative mind can kind of go. So Aoife, we'll start with you. I mean, it sounds like that's a big part of your process, but I'd love to talk about the role of movement to creativity with you.
It is a huge part of my process, and I know that Allie is also a runner, and it's like, for me, it's so multifaceted. It's a way to just maintain my physical health, which is sort of one side of it, and B, mental health, just having that sort of space in the day to have that is just mine, that I am all alone. I never listen to music while I'm running. I always do headphone free, just out there listening to whatever it is that's around me. And I also have so many songwriting ideas while I'm running, like so many. And just sort of figuring that out over the years and then being able to harness it. And sort of when I get back, I have so many voice memos, even if I have my phone, if I'm on a long run and I don't want to get lost, where I'm like breathing a hilarious, like trying to sing something into my phone in the middle of the woods while running. But I do think that movement, it's a huge part of the process for me of just sort of having that, carving out that time. Again, it's sort of back to maximizing your day. If you think about that time as being a part of your creative, if you know that daily exercise is something that you were prioritizing and creativity is something you're prioritizing, why not marry them? Why not say, well, I can try to do both at once? Or at least start, do one thing and start the other thing while I'm still doing this thing. That's kind of how I think about it.
Yeah.
Do you also use it if you're in a rut, maybe you feel like, you're stuck in a part, can exercise be a way to kind of jumpstart that process for you?
Not necessarily for me. I mean, I think it probably could be, but I haven't used it in that way specifically. I don't think but that's probably just based on like circumstance of not like everything is so timed out in my day, and it sort of has been even when you're on tour. It's sort of like, before I had a child, I was on tour all the time, and your day is also not quite your own when you're on tour. So everything. Like I'm just very used to having a very scheduled day with very limited time. So it's not often that I'm sort of sitting around and could be in the middle of working on something and get up and go for a run to get out of a rut. I love that idea. And I think next time I take myself on a solo writing retreat, I will employ that. But at this point, I just don't have the schedule.
Yeah. So there's that movement part of it, the active part. Then songwriters tell me the mundane activities, like I said, the vacuuming, the gardening, chopping vegetables. These are things I've heard, washing dishes, the really mundane activities. I've heard the vacuuming twice in the past month. That's why I bring it up. I just found that so interesting.
I'm live. My vacuum is right. I can see my vacuum from here. Yeah. Maybe I'm going to hang up and start vacuuming.
Do you ever notice, Aoife, that those, do you get song ideas in those mundane activities as well?
I don't. I don't personally. Those mundane activities for me, I like to use as a step out of that. Like if I'm cooking, I might be humming or something, but I'm usually trying to just like be in a different zone when I'm doing those sort of mundane tasks. Personally, I've never,
right.
Yeah.
Allison, how about you? The role of movement to your creative process?
Movement is extremely important to me in my creative process as well. Similar to Aoife's experience, I get probably my 80% of ideas, writing ideas in general. Working through, if I'm writing a speech or if I'm writing an essay, working through it in my mind while my body is in motion is a really, really significant, important part of my process, and also allows me to access, I have a lot of trouble meditating in stillness. And so I think of, for me, I'm not much of a speed person. I'll swim for 2 hours slowly. I'll run for 2 hours slowly. I like to do distance running. I'm really into sort of half marathon to marathon distances those are the only sort of races I've ever done, because I love that process of when you push past the point you thought you could. And that's when there's actual peace to some degree in my mind, where I feel like it just unclutters the channels for ideas to come through,
Totally.
And for the sort of nattering voices of whatever it is, self-castigation or, mindless repetition of things I don't need to repeat over and over again, stopping and allowing some other ideas to come through.
How about those mundane activities? Ever getting ideas when you're doing those mundane activities?
Yeah, I mean, definitely like in the shower, I've gotten a lot of ideas coming, but I'm also usually drumming on my body or stomping rhythmically in the shower because I'm a weirdo. And that's so these, song ideas come through. And, it started with, I think the shower stuff really intensified after motherhood, where I would go to the shower to cry when I needed to, and I didn't want to be scaring my kid. And that would just evolve into ham boning on my chest and coming up with some song, But for me, I guess maybe sweeping of all those, vacuuming is not peaceful for me. No good ideas have ever come through to me with vacuuming. I find vacuuming really stressful, and it terrifies my child and my dog. Like, they both are really auditory sensitive beings, and they hate the sound of the vacuum. And so whenever I'm vacuuming, I'm conscious of trying to do this as quickly as possible so that this sound that upsets my babies stops as quickly as possible.
You said sweeping. You said sweeping. Actually.
Sweeping.
Yeah.
I love I have an old fashioned broom, and I like a thatch kind of a broom with a wooden handle, and I love sweeping. And if I'm upset as well, I will manically sweep the house and the front porch.
That's amazing.
It calms me down, and there is something about this. It's a pleasing sound. We have a lot of hardwood floors in our house, and so that sound. We have a dog a rescue puppy who sheds like nobody's business. And so I do a lot of sweeping, and it's very satisfying to me. And I also do a lot of dishes by hand. And that's also, I'm like a Luddite that thinks that the dishwasher doesn't really get anything clean. So I'm really into doing dishes by hand. And it was an activity I did with my grandma that I loved. And she used to, in fact, sing me creepy Scottish murder ballads and lullabies, my maternal grandmother, when we did dishes. And so I associate doing dishes and the warmth of the water with that kind of happier moments from childhood, and the hidden. I associate it with the hidden canon as well, which is what I like to call all of those sorts of distilled through time and wisdom and original authorship, unknown, but often women's voices being represented there where they aren't anywhere else. The kind of folkloric, vast archive that was orally transmitted originally and only later written down. I think of that as the hidden canon, and that's a rich source for me of inspiration.
So I just read a study, and I've heard this from songwriters too, about how many song ideas they get when they are just on the cusp of sleep. Not when they're fully asleep, and not when they wake up, when they're just on the cusp. And so I actually just read the study a couple of days ago that came out, and it was fascinating because they referenced Salvador Dali. And I think I'm getting this right, but what he would do is he would kind of lay in this, he had this chair he'd lay in, and he'd hold a skeleton key. And And when the skeleton key dropped, it's when he fell asleep. He's falling asleep, but the dropping of the key and the sound would wake him up. And when he woke up, he'd furiously start to create, because he wanted to be in that moment just when he was in that kind of dozing off. And apparently now there's some research. They just did these tests with people and found that those people, I think they woke up from an extended sleep, weren't nearly as prolific as those people who were just woken up after like a minute or two. So I just read about this. It was in Smithsonian Magazine, the study. So I thought that was really cool. So Aoife, has that ever happened to you? You know, not when you wake up after a long sleep, but just like on the cusp of that.
I've never been woken up like that. If somebody wakes me up right after I fall asleep, like my reaction would probably sound like what you're hearing right now, like a child crying. But I have dreamt song ideas that I'll then wake up. Like I've dreamt entire songs that then I wake up and just spend the next, the middle of the night trying to like grasp at the shards of the dream. Or in the morning, like it'll pop into my head later in the day, like this melody that I remember dreaming, but never in that moment, that specific moment. I'm curious, like in the study, was this a study with actual professional songwriters?
No. It was
okay.
I think it was creative types. I just saw the study today. And it reminds me a little bit. I don't know if you ever read the novel. It came out a couple of years ago, Homeland Elegies. The author's name is Akhtar, and he won the Pulitzer Prize for some other book.
But the South African writer? No,
not South African. I forgot what he is, but he's not South African. But the main character in the story is also a writer, and someone told him to tie a pencil to his finger, his writing hand, so that when he wakes up, he doesn't have to fumble for the pencil. It's there, and he can, because someone told him that it was this weird thing where if your spine isn't aligned and if you don't do it immediately, it vanishes. And so he would sleep with the pencil tied to his hand.
That's so funny.
Very dangerous, but probably effective. So Allison, how about you? Has that happened to you ever in those situations?
Similar to Aoife, I've dreamt elaborate music and then woken up and tried to capture some of it. I'm trying to think if I think before my daughter, that happened more, because now if I'm woken up out of sleep, it's generally her, and it's generally an intense need that needs to be attended to in that moment. And there's no time to allow, whatever came through in the liminal threshold space to shine or whatever. Yeah. It's just like, I peed the bed, or I'm thirsty, or, whatever it is. And so not recently, but I do feel like there were times in the early days of my first serious band, Poe Girl. I'm someone who falls asleep instantly when we're in motion on the road. And so I just sleep. Like that's my tour gift, is I can sleep anywhere, literally anywhere, and in any uncomfortable, ridiculous position, in any moving vehicle. Like that's and frankly, I'm terrified most of the time when I'm in specifically a vehicle on the road. I feel much safer in planes than I do in cars and vans, but I've spent the majority of my touring life in cars and vans. And I've only ever done a couple of bus tours with other projects, Our Native Daughters, and when I was a guest on Stuart McLean's Vinyl Cafe before he passed away. And those were fascinating because my most recent record is called Outside Child, and I wrote a lot of it on the Our Native Daughters tour bus in 2019. And it was being in this bunk space and having my daughter wake me out of sleep quite frequently because she was just nervous about the new situation. She was a, working class musician's kid. So she was used to the van tours and was totally freaked out by the bus and the bunks. And it was a particularly derelict, gross bus. So, it wasn't great, but the company was great. The bus itself, we were all terrified. So, there was a lot of being woken out of just having fallen asleep. And I did write a ton on that tour. I mean, I many of the seeds for Outside Child, kind of germinated on that tour and started to sprout. And Yeah. So kind of. I'm now very curious to try that experiment. I've had that happen accidentally with my cell phone. Like falling asleep with it in my hand, like trying to send an email when I'm just really, really tired, and it falling and me suddenly waking up. But unfortunately, in those moments, I have been thinking things like, oh no, I told the label I would post this thing 2 days ago and I better post it now. So whatever creative energy was generated, I squandered utterly on panic and like social media posting,
Yeah.
So yeah.
That actually kind of reminds me, I have in my process, like I have a couple of quirks in my writing process. Like I will never write and revise in the same chair. It's always someplace different. I don't know where I got that from, but I feel like to me, I need to be in a different space to revise than I did to write. But I know that about myself. Like, for me, I think it's important to know what your ritual is, whether it's time of day, place, a cup of tea, coffee, whiskey, anything like that. Because for me, that gives me confidence. If I know that I've been successful in those places before, it might be superstition, but I know at least, hey, there's a shot. So Aoife, is there any kind of a ritual to your process where you tend to kind of try to do the same thing each time?
I mean, I think that's just one of the main differences between songwriters who tour and people who lead a more stationary life as writers. Yeah. Because I love the idea of ritualistic writing. I don't know if you've read the book Writers and Lovers by Lily King. Have you guys read this incredible novel? It's really like, it's one of the greatest, most enjoyable novels I've read in recent memory. It came out in, I think, early 2020. It's about a young writer, and it's a lot about her process as a writer, and then sort of like her kind of the hilarity that she is going through as a young woman in Boston in the late 90s. But she talks a lot about her process and the revising process. And while reading this book, I had just finished Age of Apathy, and I was thinking about how different the process of writing and revising as a songwriter and editing when you're writing a 3-minute song is just so different from writing anything longer than, a song is like, it takes up this much paper. And so the idea that you would write and edit in a different chair, to me, it's like you're writing, like you would have to just be going back and forth from one chair to the next chair, like constantly. But in terms of other rituals, I just try to be very flexible and have a real open mind, and not sort of like the opposite of what you were saying. For me personally, I don't like to get too attached to an idea or what's going to happen. And for instance, I just did a co-writing session with some friends, with Sarah. And Sarah, we got together in my bandmates, and I'm with her just to hang out. And we were like, maybe we'll write some songs, but maybe we won't, because last time we got together, we wrote a ton of great songs and we loved every single second of it. We don't want to put that pressure on ourselves again and try to recreate the experience. Now, that said, we got there and we did kind of get some good stuff going, because we didn't make the ritual out of it. We just sort of got together. It was sort of like the exact opposite, where you just sort of say, let's see what's going to happen, and maybe the magic will come that way instead. So for me, it's very important to maintain that level of just being okay with whatever comes, because I don't know when I'm going to next be able to be in that specific place, if I'm on tour or if I'm not in Florida. I was just in Massachusetts for 2 weeks. So you just have to really be able to go with wherever your surroundings take you as a touring musician, to finish a song in a green room, to finish a song during a sound check. I feel like there's like to really be able to workshop ideas, to revise on stage in front of a microphone. Like that's another really cool thing about writing while on the road.
Yeah. So true. That's something I feel like several songs have come out of sound check jams, even.
Totally.
One of my favorite things of just the kind of, and it is that you're freed. I hear what you're saying as well, Ben, of just that you love to have that sense of, this is where it worked for me before, maybe it will work again, and that ritual sort of magic spell almost element. But I'm more of the school, I've been 22 years on the road as a musician, in various projects, and as a writer that whole time as well, and evolving my own relationship with writing throughout the years. And I hope I will, till the day I die, be evolving that relationship. But similar to Aoife, I've just had to, if I was going to need a special chair, there's just no way I wouldn't have written anything, and I don't say that in a demeaning, derogatory way at all to your process. And I love that notion of maybe when I am home, evolving a home ritual, because that's something new. This, where I'm speaking to you from, is our first ever home. You know, I'm a 42-year-old mom who's been on the road for 22 years and like really intensely on the road, like before the pandemic, 250 days plus of the year on the road, you know, because I was and still am a working class musician, where we couldn't take a year off and be okay. You know, we just couldn't. We've never been in that position financially, and we're still not, you know, even with sort of a lot of doors have opened this year, and having a real kind of stable and good label relationship for the first time, and relationship with a song publisher and that sort of thing. And now hopefully soon a good relationship with a literary publisher. But it's still, that's also new, you know, and for, as Aoife said, so much of the early part of the pandemic wasn't this like endless time. It was, now you have to somehow figure out a way to keep doing your job and feed the family while also having no childcare, while also having no school for them to go to, while also learning how to be a homeschool teacher. And guess what? I suck. I'm a horrible teacher. Horrible. My daughter doesn't want me to be her teacher in that way, you know, every day learning a curriculum. I'm great at supplementing what somebody else is doing. I'm awful at running the whole curriculum, you know, and luckily my partner JT is much better than I am at that. So it was, he really he filled the breach in those early days. But it was, what I found so fascinating about that time was there was this narrative of, oh, we have all this time. There was no, we're depressed, we're terrified when the next work is going to come. I was definitely drinking too much at the beginning, but I had to go dry because it was just like, I doesn't need drunk, depressed mom for the rest of the pandemic, so I'm not going to do it. But, you know, there was like, I saw that road as that was a road, you know, like I didn't end up traveling it ultimately, but it's like, you know, it was not, and it was doing these, learning how to, the lights that I am currently, you know, lit with, learning how to do our own lighting and how to set some sort of scene so that it's, you know, you can give a virtual performance where someone can feel somewhat connected. I mean, it was such, am I allowed to swear on this show?
Sure.
It was such a shit show, you know, all of it for so long. And it was like painfully figuring out these things that are someone's full-time job. Someone went to school to learn how to light. Someone went to school to learn how to engineer a session, you know, and do the whole thing. It wasn't me, you know, but I learned slowly, painfully. And in fact, Yola and my family, we spent the early part of the lockdown together. We spent,
okay.
Yeah, we were living together. We lived together. You know, she would, whenever she came from England to work on her record here and work on her career here and build her team and all that great stuff, she was staying with us. And we were living in a house outside of Nashville in Madison that Rhiannon Giddens originally bought. And so we did the gardening, and Yola set up a badminton net and archery with my sister Anna. And we made the best of it, you know, and I learned how to light. I went deep down the rabbit hole of how to light darker skin tones, because it turns out the median, her name is Shirley. This is what photographers use. And Shirley is, even Aoife might be too dark for Shirley's template. You know, she's like,
wait, who's Shirley?
Shirley is the template that all lighting directors up until very recently have used as their, and Shirley was a model in the 30s who was very white with blonde hair and blue eyes. And so none of those lighting cues work for me or Yola, you know. So for those of you listening, I am a Black woman and so is Yola. So, it's like, it was so wild, like all the things that I spent hours studying affordable lights. I spent hours studying what microphone.
What shows were you doing that required such an extensive, and now I feel like, what did I do in the pandemic? I mean, like, I think I took like an IKEA lamp and pointed it at my face. I mean, what were the...
So we had to do Carnegie Hall with Native Daughters. We had to do the Monterey Jazz Fest. We had to by video, you know, and like
legit stuff. Okay. Not like
and
a-
Yola had tiny desk, you know, and so it was like, okay. And she had the Rolling Stone from Your Room. That's when I first got them for that, because it was like, well, we got to figure out the lighting somehow, because the lighting in our house was horrible, and both Yola and I disappeared. You know, it's like, oh, you can't see us at all. You can see JP and Anna, who are paler skinned. It's like,
that is so hilarious.
So we had to just learn lighting by default, or some form of it. But I mean, these are the things that, like, the amount of time that you take. There wasn't even forming a ritual. It was like you form a ritual to undo it. You know, of course, as soon as we all got vaccinated and as soon as we could test and we could do other things and it started to ease up a bit, you know, we were incredibly lucky to meet the people who sold us this home. This is our first ever forever home, you know? So as a 42-year-old working class musician mom, I've never had a room of my own ever. I've never had a space of my own ever. It's been always communal living in one form or another due to poverty and necessity. And it's also been just constant motion, because I was trapped on the hamster wheel of subsistence touring in order to support my family. And it wasn't until the lockdown that I started to even think strategically beyond that. That's the truth.
That's a ritual. That's you can create a new ritual now that you have.
Yeah.
So, yeah, that's funny because Allison, you know, the other thing you brought this, you mentioned this, but you know, how a lot of songwriters told me when the pandemic first started, it was hard to write because it's hard to write under great emotional weight, right? I mean, it's just, and Hemingway has this thing where Hemingway said he could never write in Paris when he was in Paris. He could never write in a place. He needed distance to be able to write about that place. And I feel it's the same way with emotions, right? But some songwriters tell me that they need to be in that emotion to be able to write about it. Others say they need distance to be able to write about it. So I guess, Allison, I'll start with you. I mean, how do you fall in that? Do you need space to be able to write about something, or is it better to be in the moment?
That's I don't think it's an either or for me. Mm-hmm. I think it's more of a both. It's not zero sum. And also for me, writing helps give me some distance to process the emotion that I'm in. You know, my impetus toward creative writing was always mired in trauma just because of my life circumstances. You know, survivor of 15 years of childhood severe abuse. So that's just where, you know, it's bound up for me. It's never been separate, intense emotion and the urge to process that or I don't know if even process is exactly the right word. It's the need to control something, I suppose. Mm-hmm. And writing is the only thing, no matter if all the gigs go away, if whatever happens, you know, if all my fingers break, I could still write, you know? Mm-hmm. So writing for me, there's a comfort to it. It's never deserted me.
Yeah. How about you, Aoife? Can you write do you need distance, or is it more effective to write about something in that moment?
I think the same. I agree with Allison here. It's definitely both. I think during the pandemic, I wrote most of the music that's on the record that's about to come out during the pandemic. And it definitely you could hear the pandemic in it, I think, and the pandemic makes itself known through the music, but it's not necessarily about the specificity of the pandemic. It's sort of like, it's just sort of a shadow over the top of it. I think that sometimes if you're having, I think especially love songs, I found are much easier to write when you're really in them. If you really are experiencing great heartbreak, I think it's easier to, for me, it has been easier to just get the song out, like to sit down and write it, because I feel like you'll just, and maybe it won't even be a very good song, because maybe the distance is what will make it be a better song and a more universal song. But I think it's important to have that experience of experiencing something and getting it out, and then maybe editing it later. I don't know. I think it depends on what the emotion is that you're trying to get out there.
Gotcha.
So key to editing later. I think about this all the time. I think about how much time I wasted as a younger writer, trying to edit as I was creating, which is just so self-defeating. It's so self-defeating. And if that's anytime, if anyone ever asks me advice about writing, which I try very hard not to give advice, because everyone's process is so different and everyone's experience is so different. But the only thing I ever say is don't prematurely edit yourself.
Yeah, I think I would agree with that. And I think it's also that's where the distance, that's where the distance comes in really handy, is to be able to say, and it doesn't have to be tons of distance, but I think even overnight or even later that day, it's not always, write something and then leave it for a year. In some cases it can be. With Prodigal Daughter, actually the song that Allison sang on my record, that she just turned into something that it never could have been without her, was something I started many years ago, and I never was able to finish it until the pandemic, until I sort of, the story just kind of finished itself in my mind. After starting the song with Tim O'Brien during the pandemic, I was able to look back on that and sort of take it to the next level. And then with Allison singing on it, I feel like it just went even further down that road. I have one. Can I ask one question to Allison, just because I'm so curious that as we're doing this songwriter process thing, because I know that you write so much with your husband, which that like really fascinates me as somebody who's married to a musician as well, not a songwriter. And I don't know, Ben, what your wife does, or if she's also a creative person, but I really would just love to hear, especially like on Night Flyer, which just an incredible song, nominated for the Grammy for Americana Song. Just so badass that you guys wrote that together and that you're now nominated for this award together. Can you just tell me a little bit? I don't want to like steal Ben's questions, but I could text you this and you can answer it.
No, I want to hear it. No, this is my dream. This is what I want. Please.
I'm just like dying to know, how do you write a song like that with your husband? I'm just really curious how that specific song, what the process was for that song. If you can just tell me, because I'm curious.
The process.
I'm not trying to steal Ben's questioning. I'm just genuinely curious.
Not at all.
You know what is interesting, Aoife, is JT and I really hadn't done that much co-writing until Outside Child. We've done a little bit.
Because he did a lot of more of the writing on Birds of Chicago, or it was more separate. Like he wrote stuff.
More separate. No, he definitely did. It was more separate. And also the life of the band. We only had 1 year together as a band before I got pregnant and then had Ida. And for me, getting pregnant and having Ida was the beginning of a long, fallow period as a writer, where I struggled to finish a song, I would say for almost 4 years, until we started Our Native Daughters sessions, Songs of Our Native Daughters sessions for Smithsonian Folkways. And that was not until January of 2018 that we were actually recording those songs. They came out the following year, but we did a 10-day sort of intensive in the Bayou of Louisiana, Bow Bridge, Louisiana. And it was a similar thing to what you're talking about with getting together with Sarah for I'm With Her, where we just, except that we didn't know, Rhiannon and I are like sisters and go back years and years. We met in 2006 at the Vancouver Folk Fest, but Amethyst and I just glancingly knew each other. I only really knew Layla through her brief stint in the Chocolate Drops before she started her solo career. We didn't know each other that well, but it was like this intensive, immediate kind of floodgates opening that sort of broke the dam for me of the kind of writers. I don't even think of it as a writer's block anymore. I think I was like a field that had been drained of all nutrients and needed to lie fallow for a time. And I think there was like the enormity of becoming a mom, and there was just all of that, which led to JT writing the bulk of the songs for Birds of Chicago for 6 of the 7 years that we were really active, and then the Native Daughters thing happened, and that kicked open the floodgates. And it was also the first time JT and I had a real separation, and the first time he was away from our kid. I had been away from our kid for the Native Daughter sessions, and he obviously held down the home fort and took care of Ida. And then when I went on the Native Daughters tour, we brought our kids with us. So I brought Ida with me, and he went and did a writer's retreat at our friend Karen Mallory's place. She works every year for oh my gosh, in Bellows Falls, Vermont, that wonderful festival that Ray Masuko puts on.
Roots on the River.
Thank you. Yes, she works every year for Roots on the River. What is wrong with me? My brain has left the building apparently. I need to do some exercise, but
Go.
Yeah. So we met her there, and she has this lovely sort of cabin kind of a place, and she let JT do a writer's retreat there while I was on the road with Our Native Daughters through July of 2019. And that is when we started sharing dreams, basically, of my early childhood. And it was really one of the more inexplicable and intense, but also intimate and powerful creative experiences I've ever had with anyone. And it was our first time being apart, that we suddenly, where I was sending him voice memos and sending him lyrics, and he was going, I think I just wrote the chorus of this song. And we're like writing it back and forth. I'm like, that is definitely the chorus of this song.
That's so cool.
That is his chorus all the way. But then I was writing these verses, and I had been upset. We both have deep wells of nerddom in us, is what I would say, of JT and I. And, I had been obsessing over these Nag Hammadi scriptures, which, the Gnostic Gospels are found among them. But also there's this one particular poem, Thunder the Perfect Mind. I don't know if either of you have read it, but it's one of the few clearly written from, clearly a woman writing, first person woman. And this sort of expansive, deeply modern to my ears poem of sort of declaring your own dichotomies and contradictions, but also like naming your power thereby, and it's a piece of poetry I've been obsessed with since I was 16 years old. And I was reading that a bunch for whatever reason on that tour. And that particular song definitely grows out of those meditations. It grows out of, the meditations on motherhood and and art, and how art for me has been a lifeline. And for so many people that I know who have totally different circumstances has been a lifeline, And so that song was sort of like a manifesto, I suppose, in a way, for the whole record, and that was one of the first songs we wrote. Fourth Day Prayer and Night Flyer were two of the first songs that we wrote.
And that's it. Thanks for listening to my interview with Allison Russell and Aoife O'Donovan. Check out their new music. Again, Russell's new album is called Outside Child. It's been nominated for 3 Grammys this year. And Aoife O'Donovan's new album is called Age of Apathy. Thanks for listening, everyone.